She took the wrong luggage at the airport, unaware it belonged to a CEO who'd been waiting for a sign to love again. The arrivals terminal at JFK buzzed with exhaustion and static airport announcements. Lena Torres dragged her feet toward baggage claim, the fatigue of the red-eye flight from Seattle pulling at her like an anchor. Her long blonde hair was tied in its usual lazy bun, a few strands falling over her pale cheeks. She rubbed her temples, barely awake as the conveyor belt began to churn. Another black suitcase rounded the corner, nearly identical to hers. Same size, same scuffed corner. Without a second glance, Lena grabbed it, tossed it onto her cart, and wheeled it out into the chaos of the city. By the time she reached her small walk-up apartment in Queens, it was past midnight. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her coat on the floor, and sat cross-legged on the faded carpet. The suitcase sat in front of her like an unspoken question. She popped the latches, then froze. Inside wasn't the usual crumpled clothes and half-used toiletries. Instead, there was a thick folder, matte black, stamped in red block letters, "Confidential." Beneath it, more binders, files, and one neatly wrapped manila envelope. A sleek business card slid out from the folder and landed face up on the floor. Virex Industries, Lucian Gray, Chief Executive Officer, confidential delivery only. Lena's heart kicked against her ribs. Virex? She knew the name. Everyone in finance did. One of the fastest-growing tech finance hybrids in the country. And Lucian Gray, young, brilliant, impossible to reach. Rumor had it, he was in the middle of a billion-dollar merger. She stared at the folder, her breath shallow. Every instinct screamed, "Put it back. Do not open this." But the seal was already cracked. She reached for her phone, maybe to look up a contact, maybe to send an apology, and that's when the first message arrived. Unknown number. You took the wrong luggage. Do not read what's inside. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m. Gray Tower. Her stomach twisted. She backed away from the suitcase, suddenly wide awake. The rest of the night stretched on like a held breath. Lena tried to sleep. She tossed. She turned. The suitcase seemed to hum in the corner of her room, vibrating with secrets. She stared at the ceiling, arms crossed over her chest, torn between panic and temptation. Just a glance, she told herself. She returned to the case, kneeling down, the dim light from the hallway casting long shadows across the floor. She flipped open the top folder. The words blurred at first. Corporate language, standard structures. Then a chart caught her eye, an overview of the proposed merger. Something in the numbers didn't sit right. She scanned again. A small table showed net asset valuation, partner firm B. The values looked familiar, too familiar. She pulled out her old laptop and opened a spreadsheet she hadn't touched in months, one she'd kept from her last job, right before everything fell apart. The numbers matched. Exactly. She frowned, eyes narrowing. That didn't make sense. Firm B wasn't even active the last she heard. There had been rumors of bankruptcy. So how was it being valued this high? She dug deeper, cross-referenced dates, found a discrepancy in the way liabilities were reported. It wasn't obvious, but for someone who knew where to look, it was there. A mistake? Or a lie? Lena leaned back against the wall, folder in her lap, the city humming outside her window. She hadn't meant to open the wrong suitcase, but somehow she had opened a door, one that might lead back to the very world she thought she had left behind. Finance, corruption, secrets. Only this time, she wasn't being silenced. This time, someone wanted her to walk through it. And waiting on the other side was Lucian Gray. Gray Tower rose like a blade into the Manhattan skyline. Glass, steel, and silence. Lena stood outside the revolving doors, her fingers clenched around the suitcase handle. A part of her wanted to drop it on the curb and disappear. But she had read the message. She had opened the files. And no matter how much she regretted it, there was no undoing that. She stepped inside. The lobby was vast, marble floors gleaming beneath the soft echo of heels. A receptionist waved her toward the private elevator without asking questions. Apparently, they had been expecting her. The ride to the top was fast and silent. Lena caught her reflection in the mirror-polished walls. Pale skin, light makeup barely hiding the tired under-eyes, her messy blonde bun pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. She looked more like a barista than a financial advisor. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe he'd forget her face. But as the doors slid open, she knew that wasn't going to happen. Lucian Gray stood at the end of the room, next to a long glass table. Tall, sharp suit, dark eyes that didn't blink as she entered. His features were chiseled, unreadable. The kind of man headlines described as ruthless but brilliant. The kind of man who didn't appreciate surprises. "Miss Torres," he said, voice cool, "I assume you have my property." She wheeled the suitcase forward and stopped a few feet away. "I didn't mean to take it. They were identical." "I see," he said without emotion. "And yet, you opened it." She shifted. "Yes, I didn't mean to, but I didn't know what was inside until... And yet, you read confidential documents." He cut in, voice quiet but pointed. Lena's mouth opened, then shut. What could she say? Lucian stepped closer. "Do you always violate corporate privacy laws as a hobby, or was this a special occasion?" That snapped something in her. "I read 2 pages, she snapped. "And if you're referring to the Partner B asset sheet, that valuation is inflated." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Excuse me?" She crossed her arms. "The numbers are built off data from 2019, which was already under dispute back then. Either your finance team is sloppy, or someone is feeding you fiction." Lucian didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied her, longer this time. She felt his gaze move over her, not with judgment, but calculation. "I know those numbers," she added, quieter now. "I used to work for the parent firm, the one Virex is merging with. That chart is nearly identical to a fake projection I was asked to sign off on." "You were involved in that firm?" Lucian asked, eyes narrowing again. "I was a financial advisor," she said. "They wanted me to approve a falsified report to show growth. I refused. They made sure I disappeared after that." Lucian took a step back, expression unreadable. "Why did you open the folder, Lena?" She hesitated. "Because I saw the logo, and because some part of me still cares, even if no one else does." There was a pause. Then, surprisingly, Lucian gestured to the chair near the table. "Sit down. 15 minutes. That's all." Lena blinked. "Why?" "Because you're either the most dangerously nosy woman I've met," he said calmly, "or the only one in 3 months who has noticed something I've been trying to confirm." He sat across from her. "If you didn't do anything wrong," he said after a beat, "then why did you let the industry push you out?" Lena looked down at her hands. "Because the truth only matters when powerful people decide it does." Lucian didn't answer, but in his stillness, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt like someone was actually listening. The next morning, Lena found herself standing in the shadows of the executive floor of Gray Tower, again. But this time, she wasn't alone in the elevator. Lucian stood beside her, quiet, unreadable. "You won't speak," he told her calmly. "Just observe. Through the glass." "Glass?" she asked, confused. He didn't answer. When the doors opened, he led her to a narrow corridor, discreet and dimly lit. At the end was a small observation room with tinted glass. One-way mirror, she realized. Beyond it, a sleek, modern boardroom buzzed with quiet conversation. Lucian pointed to a chair. "That seat's been empty for weeks. No one notices. No one questions." Lena sat down, heart beating fast. Through the glass, she could see 5 people seated, senior executives. At the head of the table was Adrian Lang, Virex's vice president, charming, confident, with 2 perfect hair. She recognized the others only by name. Papers shuffled, slides clicked. Adrian began presenting a new version of the merger proposal. Lena leaned closer, squinting at the projected numbers. Her eyes narrowed. Something didn't sit right. They were using projections based on a quarter that hadn't ended. Worse, the adjustments to round out irregularities were based on hypothetical external investments that hadn't been confirmed. Lena didn't need to be a genius to see it. It wasn't fraud yet, but it was dangerously close. No one in the room raised a question. They nodded, agreed, jotted notes. Lena sat back slowly. "They're building a house of cards," she muttered. When the meeting ended, Lucian didn't say anything. He simply turned and walked. She followed. They ended up back in his office. He shut the door gently and leaned against it, arms crossed. "Well?" he asked. "They're not incompetent," Lena said flatly. "They know exactly what they're doing." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "They're prepping numbers to look just right for outside review. Those numbers can't hold up under scrutiny. The board signs this off, and your company becomes the perfect target for a leveraged takeover." Lucian was silent for a long beat. Then, "You think I'm being played?" "I think," Lena said carefully. "You're being led by people who smile while they hand you a loaded gun." Her words hung in the air like dust in sunlight. Lucian stared out the window, jaw tight. "I've already lost everything once," he murmured. "I trusted the wrong people, took their advice, watched the company nearly burn to the ground." He turned to her. "And now, the only one who's telling me the truth is someone who walked in here because she picked up the wrong luggage." Lena didn't smile. She didn't flinch. "Maybe," she said. "The luggage wasn't wrong after all." Lucian nodded slowly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then it's time I find out who's really been packing it for me." And with that, Lucian Gray began watching his team with new eyes. Lucian didn't tell her where they were going until they were already on the road. The city disappeared behind them, replaced by winding coastal highways, rain-slicked pines, and the hush of a coming storm. Lena sat in the passenger seat, arms folded, watching the trees blur by. "Why this place?" she asked finally. Lucian kept his eyes on the road. "It used to be my escape. My dad and I came here before things got too big, too loud." The rain picked up as they arrived at the secluded beachfront resort, an aging but charming place nestled against a cliff with white cottages scattered along the shore. The front desk clerk looked apologetic. "Just one cottage left, I'm afraid. 2 bedrooms, but shared living space. Storm's moving in fast. Most guests canceled, but we're locking down tonight." Lucian glanced at Lena. "We'll manage." Inside, the space was cozier than expected. Weathered wooden floors, sea blue walls, a small fireplace, and shelves full of forgotten books. Lena opened the fridge and blinked. "Strawberry milk?" she murmured, amused. Lucian chuckled. "I figured. You picked the pink cupcake, didn't you?" She raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Later, as they unpacked, Lena opened the wrong door, directly into the bathroom, where Lucian was peeling off his soaked jacket. Both froze. "Sorry," she said quickly, spinning away. Lucian cleared his throat. "It's fine. Honest mistake." The air between them buzzed with the awkwardness of 2 people not used to sharing space. That evening, the power went out with a low hum and a flicker. The wind howled outside. Lucian lit a few candles, placing them around the living room. The glow turned their faces golden. They sat on the couch, a single blanket between them. Outside, the sea crashed and the windows rattled. "I used to love storms," Lena said softly. "When I was little, they made the world feel smaller, like everyone had to pause and just sit still for a minute." Lucian nodded. "I forgot what it felt like to sit still." There was a pause. Then, in the quiet, he asked, "Do you know what it's like to finally trust someone again after a very long time?" Lena glanced at him. "Yes." She told him about the partner she once trusted, a man who called her his little sister until the day he threw her under the bus to protect a fraudulent report. Lucian shared about his mentor, once like family, who leaked Virex's earliest designs for personal gain. Their voices were low, almost reverent, as if they were handling old wounds that still ached. I built walls after that, Lucian admitted. I thought if I kept everything strictly business, no one could hurt me again. You do that well, Lena said, not unkindly. He smiled faintly. You're the first person in years who called me out on my numbers. You didn't even blink. Thunder rumbled. A branch hit the roof with a heavy crack. Lena jumped, startled, and instinctively grabbed Lucian's hand. They both stilled. The candlelight flickered. Lucian gently pulled his hand back, not to retreat, but to drape a woolen scarf over her shoulders. Wherever you are, he said, voice soft, you should always have someone to keep you warm. Lena looked down, then away, but she smiled. A real smile, one not guarded. Later that night, Lucian went to boil water on the gas stove. When he returned, Lena was waiting at the door, holding a towel. His hair was wet from the rain, his hands trembling slightly from the cold. She didn't say anything. She took the towel and began drying his hair with slow, gentle movements. Lucian closed his eyes. The moment felt like something neither of them could name. There were no grand declarations, no sudden kisses, just the quiet care of one person tending to another in the simplest way. On the kitchen table, between a flickering candle, a steaming mug, and the hum of rain beyond the glass, something began to grow. Something fragile, but real. Lucian didn't return to the office right away. Instead, he took a detour, a quiet neighborhood nestled just outside the city, where the trees were taller than the rooftops and time seemed to slow. He parked in front of a 2-story brick house with green shutters and a wraparound porch. This was home, he said softly, turning off the engine. Before the company, before everything. Lena followed him up the steps, not sure what to expect. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The house had been kept exactly as it was, dusty perhaps, but untouched by time. Framed photographs lined the hallway, a young Lucian on his father's shoulders, a woman with kind eyes holding a birthday cake, a family that had once been whole. Lena paused in front of a small wooden plaque hanging in the kitchen. Always tell the truth, even if your voice shakes. She touched the edge of the frame. Your father's? Lucian nodded. He used to say that before every board meeting. Said integrity was the only legacy worth leaving. They sat in the living room, surrounded by pieces of his past. Dog-eared books, an old chessboard, a worn leather chair near the window. My dad ran Virex like a family, Lucian said. He believed in people, trusted them. After he died, the company changed. Or maybe I did. Lena looked at him, her voice gentle. You started surviving instead of leading. Lucian gave a dry laugh. Yeah, I became the numbers guy, the cold face of the company. Safer that way. There was a silence. Not awkward, but full. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the file, the one she'd found in the wrong suitcase. The merger proposal. I've looked at this a dozen times, he said, but something still doesn't sit right. He opened the folder and spread the pages across the coffee table. Lena leaned in. This signature here, she said, pointing to the last page. It's dated 2 days before the board even reviewed the draft. How is that possible? Lucian frowned, checking the timestamp. That's not right. She flipped another page. And this supposed partner company, Cortain Holdings? I tried looking them up. Nothing. No registration, no address, no tax records. It's a shell, if that. Lucian's jaw tightened. There's more, Lena said. This clause here allows temporary transfer of control in the event of an emergency vote. It's buried under legal jargon, but if this merger goes through, your voting rights could be suspended. All someone has to do is engineer a crisis. Lucian stared at the document. The paper felt heavier now. This wasn't just sloppy work, he murmured. It was deliberate. The realization washed over him like ice. He had been maneuvered into a corner, and someone he trusted had put him there. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. I handpicked this team, every one of them. Adrian was with me when we rebuilt Virex. I would have trusted him with my life. Lena sat back beside him, not speaking, just letting the silence settle. Lucian's eyes were dark, not just with anger, but betrayal. A different kind of pain. The kind that came when your enemy wasn't a rival, but someone you once called friend. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Lena said, "Maybe your father was right. Maybe the truth matters, even if it shakes everything." Lucian looked at her, and for once, the sharp CEO facade fell away. All that remained was a man. Wounded, but not broken. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "You don't have to know," Lena replied. "You just have to start." And in that old living room, beneath the gaze of family photos and memories long buried, Lucian Gray took his first breath as a man ready to face the truth, not just in his company, but in himself. Back at her apartment, Lena decided to give the old black suitcase one final check before tossing it into storage. The thing had been a bizarre catalyst for the most unexpected week of her life, and somehow, it felt wrong to just close the lid and move on. She ran her hand through the inner lining and felt something. A hidden zipper. She tugged it open. Tucked deep inside was a small silver USB. No markings, no label. Lena stared at it, heart thudding. Then she plugged it into her laptop. There were 2 folders. Virex, original, merger, plan, internal, email, logs. She clicked through the documents, breath slowing with every page. The merger proposal was different from the one Lucian had shown her. Cleaner, transparent, no shell companies, no sudden transfers of voting power. The emails, though, chilled her. Thread after thread between Adrian and external contacts. Discussions about steering the merger, quiet asset shifts, and the most damning phrase of all, "Once the signature is processed, we proceed with transition." She froze. The timestamp on Lucian's signature page was dated before the official meeting took place. A forged document, and Lucian had no idea. She grabbed her phone. 30 minutes later, Lucian stood in her apartment. He read through the emails with stone-cold silence, then opened the original merger plan and stared at the final pages. "My signature," he said finally, "was never put on that version." He closed the laptop. "Tomorrow. 9 a.m. boardroom. You're coming with me." The next morning, Lena stood just outside the Virex executive boardroom. Inside, Adrian was presenting the final green-lit proposal. His voice smooth, posture sharp. Lucian sat at the head of the table, calm, watching. Halfway through Adrian's speech, Lucian raised a hand. "That's enough," he said. Adrian paused, confused. "We're almost through." Lucian gestured to Lena, who entered with a quiet nod and plugged in the USB. The screen behind them lit up. First slide, original merger draft, unsigned. Second, side-by-side comparison with the current approved version. Then the email logs. Silence. Adrian stiffened. "What is this?" Lucian stood. "It's what the plan looked like before someone altered it. Before my signature was copied and pasted. Before outside players were promised controlling interest in Virex." "You're accusing me?" "I'm not accusing," Lucian said evenly. "I'm showing." Lena stepped forward, voice calm but clear. "The company listed as your partner? It doesn't exist. And the voting structure in your draft transfers power away from this board." Adrian scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Your password was used to open and modify the documents. The metadata is traceable. Fatis." Lucian looked at him. "You knew I was uncertain. You used that to move things through. I trusted you." Adrian's face turned pale. Lucian cut him off. "I already lost one family because of misplaced trust. I'm not losing this company too. Security didn't need to be called." Adrian quietly packed his files and left the room without another word. Later that afternoon, Lucian sat alone in his office, staring out over the skyline. Lena entered, gently setting down a mug of tea. "I figured you didn't want to be alone," she said softly. He took the cup, still quiet. After a moment, he asked, If someone broke your trust, someone close, do you ever forgive them? She thought. If they meant it, maybe, but I wouldn't forget, and I wouldn't let them close enough to do it again. Lucien nodded, his fingers tightening around the mug. Then he looked up at her. No words this time. Just something in his eyes that had never been there before. Something open, real. And maybe for the first time in a long time, he wasn't carrying it alone. The rain was soft, almost absent, as it tapped against the tall windows of Lucien's office. Lena stood near the door, her hair pulled back in its usual lazy bun, a scarf draped over her shoulders. She held the black suitcase with both hands, worn at the edges, a faint scuff near the handle, and gently placed it on the glass table. Lucien looked up from his desk. No words were exchanged. On top of the suitcase, a folded piece of paper rested. He picked it up, opened it. Inside was one sentence, handwritten in neat, slanted script. I thought I just grabbed the wrong luggage. I didn't know I'd also pick up a life I never expected to live. He stared at it for a long moment. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. No request for her to stay. No emotional plea. Lena gave him a soft nod, then turned and walked out, her coat swaying gently behind her. Rain trailed down the windows like memories. Lucien stood and walked to the glass, watching her disappear into the street, her yellow umbrella vanishing into the city crowd. 2 hours later, JFK Airport buzzed with noise. Announcements echoed through the terminals, travelers dragging wheeled bags behind them, some rushing, some dragging their feet. Lena sat quietly in gate 29, her new suitcase beside her. Sleek, unscuffed, nothing like the battered one she had returned. She had always wanted to visit Paris again. A clean break, a clean slate. She stared at the boarding pass in her hand, then slowly turned her eyes toward the crowd moving through the terminal. And for a moment, she hesitated. She pulled out her phone, opened a message window, typed 3 words, "I'm still here," then deleted them. She didn't want to be someone who sent a message and disappeared. Not again. The gate agent's voice crackled over the speaker. Final boarding call for flight 848 to Paris. Final boarding. Lena inhaled deeply, tightened her grip on the suitcase handle. Her throat ached. She stood. 1 step. 2. Then, "Lena." She froze. The voice, familiar, urgent, breathless, cut through the crowd. She turned. Lucien. He was running, jacket half-buttoned, tie crooked, hair damp with sweat or rain, or both. In his arms was something oddly familiar, the old suitcase, the one she had returned, the one that changed everything. He reached her, panting, eyes locked on hers. He looked nothing like the calm, polished CEO she had met that first day. He looked like a man who had finally figured out what mattered, only to realize he might be too late. Lena dropped her sleek new suitcase and ran. They met in the middle of the terminal, breathless. But they didn't hug, didn't kiss, just stood inches apart, watching each other like the moment might shatter if touched too hard. Lucien's voice was low, raw. "You saved my company. You saved my name. I will always be grateful for that. But what scares me is that you'll think that's all I ever wanted from you." His fingers clenched the handle of her old suitcase. His shoulders rose and fell with each heavy breath. "I'm not asking you to stay for Virex. Or because you're right. I'm asking." He paused, searching her face. "Because for the first time in my life, I trust someone with everything I am. Not my business. Me." Lena blinked, and the tears came without warning. Not out of pain, but because she knew, in her bones, that every word was real. She gave him a trembling smile and nodded. It wasn't a dramatic yes. It wasn't loud, but it was the loudest yes of her life. She stepped closer, gently laid her head against his chest. Lucien wrapped his arms around her, holding the suitcase between them like a relic of everything they had been through. Behind them, the gate closed. Flight 848 took off without her. But Lena didn't feel like she had missed anything. She had found where she was meant to be. Not Paris, not the past. Just here, with him. 1 year later, the front of the Virex headquarters gleamed under the spring sun, its sleek glass facade reflecting a brighter sky and a quieter kind of power. Beneath the familiar logo, a new line had been engraved in brushed silver: "Integrity is our foundation." On the top floor, the corner office once reserved for Lucian Gray had been transformed. The doors now stayed open. Light streamed through the tall windows, and laughter occasionally drifted into the hallway. The air was no longer heavy with formality. It felt lived in, human. At the long conference table, Lena sat beside Lucienne, her golden hair tied back in a loose, tidy ponytail. She wore a white button-up shirt, sleeves rolled just past her elbows, and scribbled notes in the margin of a budget report while sipping black coffee. Lucian leaned over her shoulder, reviewing the same page. His tie loosened, a quiet smile on his face. There was no plaque on her desk that said co-founder or chief strategy officer. Titles weren't necessary. Everyone at Virex knew who she was. They hadn't made a public statement about their relationship. No romantic press releases, no photos on social media. But inside these walls, they were a team. And more than that, they were proof that a company built on truth could actually survive, maybe even thrive. A soft knock at the door. Graham, the new intern, barely 19, tie slightly crooked, stood holding a printed spreadsheet. Excuse me, he said. "I think there's a discrepancy in Q2 payroll, but I'm not sure if it's me or the formula." Lena looked up, eyebrow raised. "Are you certain it's wrong?" Graham hesitated. "Not exactly, but I'm more afraid of staying quiet than being wrong." Lucian chuckled quietly and exchanged a look with Lena. "That," she said warmly, "is the right kind of fear." Lucian nodded. "Come in. Let's take a look." Behind the intern, a poster near the break room read, "Here, truth doesn't cost you your job, it earns you your place." That weekend, in the garden behind Lucian and Lena's modest home just outside the city, fairy lights were strung along wooden posts, twinkling in the soft dusk. A breeze rustled through beds of fresh herbs and newly planted daisies. Lena stood by the outdoor oven, flipping golden brown cookies onto a cooling rack. Her sleeves were dusted in flour. Lucian came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and rested his chin lightly on her shoulder. "You never stop moving," he murmured. "You never stop watching," she teased, smiling. He kissed her temple. "I still haven't thanked that suitcase." She glanced sideways at him. "But maybe," he continued, "it was the first thing you ever gave me." Lena leaned into him, letting the silence speak more than any reply could. A few steps away, on the wooden railing of the porch, sat the old black suitcase. Its zippers no longer worked. One wheel had broken off entirely. But inside, there was no paperwork, no tangled secrets, only rich, dark soil and a small spray of white daisies in full bloom. A weathered tag hung from the handle. Someone, probably Lucian, had written on it in careful black ink. "Some wrong turns. Lead exactly where you need to be." As twilight faded into evening, the sounds of soft music, quiet laughter, and shared warmth filled the air. They didn't need to tell the world their story. They were living it. Thank you for joining us on this journey. From one wrong suitcase to the right kind of love, truth, and second chances. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you smile, hope, or believe a little more in the magic of unexpected moments, don't forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We've got more heartwarming soul-deep tales coming your way, where every twist has meaning and every wrong turn just might lead you home. Subscribe now and stay tuned, because the next story might just be your favorite. Until next time, keep believing in the unexpected.